Pauline and Wendy this evening. And so it's a great pleasure. They great members of this particular group, and it's great that they are able to tell us about their individual views. And the title of their talk is Health Sovereignty.
Okay, we've got a disclaimer of our own. We're not scientists or doctors or medics or anything like that, and this is definitely not medical advice. In fact, it's not advice at all. It's a critique of the science and a little bit of history from me, and then Wendy's going to tell you something about what worked for her and share her common knowledge, right? So I think it's important to say that to start with. So I'm just going to start. So the germ theory that most people ascribe to the late 1800s actually goes way back, even to ancient Greece. And it's for a very simple reason, because if you observe the world, which we do, it would appear that people in the same place sometimes get sick with the same thing at the same time. So it's not at all unreasonable to assume they may be passing something back and forth. So that thought has been with us for literally thousands of years. Today, that thought is accepted as one of the modern proofs that viruses and bacteria are the cause of disease. The important thing here is to unpack the principle behind this. And the principle is that if people or animals in the same place get the same symptoms at the same time, that must mean it was caused by a contagious pathogen. But how about this? You go to your house and there's 100 rats in your basement, and unbeknownst to you, somebody put rat poison in the basement. And the next day, there's 10 dead rats. They all bled to death. Same symptoms, same place, same time. The next day, 10 more rats die. Same symptoms, same thing. The next day, 30 rats die, 40 rats die. Eventually, all the rats die. Here's another example. For hundreds of years, people noticed that sailors on ships got sick. Their teeth rotted in their mouth, they went into heart failure, and they died. They said there must be something transmitted from one to the other. And then they quarantined them when they came into dock. Nothing worked. They still died. And it turned out that one day somebody gave a sailor a lemon or a lime, and lo and behold, the whole thing went away because, of course, they had scurvy. Beriberi and pellagra are symptoms of deficiency that have similar historical misunderstandings. But it took hundreds of years of punishment, superstition, and quarantine to understand this. So it makes a huge difference to be wrong about it, right? So the idea that people or animals with the same symptoms in the same place must have died from a contagious pathogen is simply not true. There are literally hundreds of examples that we could give that don't prove transmission, and most certainly have nothing to do with bacteria or a virus. And then in the last 300 or 400 years, we witnessed a change in human consciousness to a more mechanistic, materialistic mode of thinking like Descartes thought, that only physical substance exists. This was a radical departure from how every prior culture and people thought about the world. The theory that we are only based on substance that we can measure, quantify, and detect is truly a radical shift. So this is the philosophical backdrop to the 1890s, and along with the invention of the light microscope, some scientists started seeing these unicellular organisms called bacteria. Then came the theory that some of the diseases that we see, or maybe most of them, are caused by this bacteria going from one person to another and making them sick. And that's basically the foundation of the germ theory. Interestingly enough, at the time, we're talking between 1850 and 1890, there was a lot of people, and in particular French chemist and biologist Antoine Béchamp, who said that's just not true. In fact, these bacteria are scavengers in nature, and they're just feeding off dead material. They don't cause any disease. It is the situation and the condition of the person. So then you have this sort of debate, germ versus terrain. Terrain just means the condition of the person. Then we have French chemist and microbiologist Louis Pasteur weighing in on this. He was like, I'm going to sort this out once and for all. So let's show an example of how this works, terrain versus germ. Let's say you have a cow. And for whatever reason, you don't feed the cow properly. And instead of feeding the cow pasture and grass, as cows are supposed to eat, you feed it grains and cardboard and dead cow parts, of course, and all the other things that we feed cows. And then on top of that, you spray the feed with glyphosate and DDT, and you give the cow worming agents and fungal killing stuff, and you vaccinate the cow, and you give it antibiotics, and all of this gets absorbed in the cow's tissue. So then we have a sick cow, right? And as we know, anything you poison an animal with comes out in the milk. So now we have poisoned milk, and the person drinks the milk, and the person gets sick. So the theory then is that something was transferred in the milk and got the person sick. Then you look at the milk under a microscope and you see this bacteria called Listeria. And the assumption is that this is a pathogen, a disease-causing agent. And then you look at the sick person's stool and you also find Listeria. And it was as if it was a eureka moment in history. End of story. We have proven that germs cause disease. The science is settled. So what's the problem? Well, it's akin to saying these fire persons, see what I did there? Must have caused this fire, because we always find them at the scene of a fire. Or these maggots must have killed this sheep, because we always find maggots at the scene of dead animals. Or this vulture must have killed this roadkill, because we always find these birds where we find roadkill. It turns out there is another possible explanation, and that explanation is also very simple and very logical. And that is, if you have poisoned milk, the role of bacteria in the world is to digest poisons wherever they are found. So the Listeria are not there as a pathogenic organism, they are there to biodegrade. In other words, to eat the poisons in the milk. In fact, they're helping the person out and they're helping the cow as well. Just like the fire persons are there to put out the fire, the maggots are there to decompose the sheep, and the buzzard is there to eat the roadkill. But let's look at what happens in nature. And we don't have to begin with theories, we can actually start with observations. Otherwise we might get blindsided. For example, if you put the wrong stuff in your compost pile, you'll get unusual bacteria. Or if you use chemicals, it can affect the pH of your compost, which will kill the worms and the microorganisms, and nobody says the compost pile has an infection. Same with a pond. You put poisons in the pond, you get algae. The algae are eating the poisons and helping the pond and you out. Nobody says the pond has an infection. So anybody can recognize that the problem is the poisons, and when you stop putting poisons in your pond by some miracle, because they don't have any more food, the algae go away. When it comes to soil and ponds, everybody seems to know that the bacteria are biodegrading it and are there to help, but for some reason we do not apply this logic to our own bodies. So getting back to our milk, we have two possible, reasonable and logical explanations. One is the bacteria are causing the disease, and the other is the poison is causing the disease. So how do we know which one of these is true? It's very simple. All you have to do is isolate the listeria from the milk, then feed somebody pure listeria. Then on another occasion, you could also feed them the milk without the listeria and see if they get sick. This is what Louis Pasteur did for 40 years. He was the first to be able to do this, sort of. He actually stole the method from someone else, but anyway, he took pure cultures of bacteria taken from sick people, fed them to healthy animals or people, and made them sick. He did public demonstrations of this, he proved the germ theory, and he saved humanity. Hooray! Right? Right? Except there was one small problem. He kept laboratory notes and a personal diary, and in that diary, which he told his heirs never to publish, but they did, he admitted that not once he was able to transfer disease with pure bacteria, not one single time. And in order to do these public demonstrations, he had to actually spike the bacteria with arsenic and mercury. So he already knew that bacteria didn't make people sick, so he had to resort to poisoning them. I won't mention what he did to monkeys' brains in order to prove rabies, but it involved drilling holes in skulls. You know the way we all get cold. Once you become really famous and risk getting caught in a fraud, it's game over, right? Oops, didn't know that was in there. So Pasteur didn't tell anyone, but he did keep meticulous notes on what he did. And famously on his deathbed, acknowledging his adversary, Claude Bernard, and later on Antoine Béchamp, he said the following: "The germ is nothing, the terrain is everything." He knew he was a complete failure and a fraud. But never mind any of that, let's just crack on and build a megalomaniacal medical empire using this astronomically profitable model of the germ theory. So that's bacteria. And if you think that might be dodgy science, wait till you find out how they find viruses. But that would be a whole other talk. So for now, we're going to look at some history. This is the dictionary definition of the word empiric. An empiric was a descriptive classification of doctors and healers in the 1800s, including herbalists, homeopaths, chiropractors, and the like. Relying solely on observation and experiment was their method, hence the classification. This is a second dictionary definition for the word empiric. I have no idea what it is about somebody relying solely on observation and experiment that would make them a quack doctor. But thank goodness there is no such baseless ad hominems being thrown at people for holding a different viewpoint today, right? So we accepted the science, trademark, and the science was settled. This is what happened next. The germ theory became official medicine, and began to gain the upper hand on the so-called empirical doctors. Society still sanctioned both approaches to healing, and patients had a choice of using doctors called allopaths or natural healers called empirics, or probably more commonly known in this country as homeopaths. The allopathic doctors called their approach heroic medicine, based on the war model of disease, and they believed that the physician must aggressively drive disease from the body. They based their practice on what they considered scientific theory and perceived the body to be in a battle with everything outside. They used three main techniques. They bled the body to drain out the bad humours. They gave huge doses of toxic minerals like mercury and lead to displace the original disease. They also used surgery, but it was a brutal experience before anaesthesia and infection control. Few patients were willing to have surgery. Most patients feared allopathy altogether. Satirists of the day remarked that with allopathic treatment, the patient died of the cure, not the disease. In contrast to the allopathic doctors, the empirics believed in stimulating the body's own defences to heal itself. Instead of poisonous minerals, they used plant products and non-toxic substances in small quantities. They especially favoured herbs learned from the Native Americans and old European traditions. The empirics based their remedies not on theory, but on observation and experience. The balance of medical power remained equal until the turn of the century. Then new medical treatments emerged. They were potentially very profitable. The American Medical Association, the AMA, joined with strong financial forces to transform medicine into an industry. The fortunes of Carnegie, Morgan and Rockefeller financed surgery, radiation, synthetic drugs, which were to become the economic bedrock of the new medical economy. God, they look like ghouls, right? They always look like ghouls. The takeover of the medical industry was accomplished by the takeover of the medical schools. Rockefeller and Carnegie, in particular, these schools, offered tremendous amounts of money in exchange for the schools putting some of their people on the board of directors to see that their money was being used wisely. That was all. They don't have a history in eugenics or anything like that. They just want. Almost overnight, all of the major universities received huge grants, and the schools were literally taken over by the financial interests of these petroleum giants. They were able to build new buildings, add expensive equipment to their laboratories, hire top-notch teachers, and at the same time as doing that, they skewed the entire medical industry in the direction of petroleum-based pharmaceuticals. This was efficiency in philanthropy, and we've watched that with a certain person in the last 3 years. From that point forward in history, doctors would be taught pharmaceutical drugs. All of the great teaching institutions were captured in this fashion, and it's amazing how little money it took to do it. Doctors advocated expensive, radical operations. In turn, this produced a need for a large, lucrative hospital system. Radium fever swept medicine. The price of radium rose 1,000% overnight. A drug industry grew out of the booming patent medical business. And I'll tell you why that is, because you can't patent nature, right? So if you're using natural herbs, they don't make any money. So they made them pharmaceuticals, and they extracted what they needed from the plant medicine, although they didn't take the whole plant, which is part of the problem. The doctors changed educational standards and licensing regulations to exclude the empirics. Soon only AMA-approved doctors, American Medical Association, could legally practice medicine. In a brief 20 years, the AMA came to dominate medical practice and public health. Organised Medicine launched a media campaign to associate the empirics with quacks. The code word for competition was quackery. I just find that one funny. Which cigarette would you want? So now the average nurse or doctor goes through school. They get a great education. They have to be really smart to get through it. They learn all about drugs. They don't know too much about basic nutrition. They don't know anything about what Wendy's going to talk to you about, but they sure do know their drugs. If you go to your average doctor today, no matter what it is for, chances are you're going to walk out of there with a prescription. Why? Because that is what they have been trained to do. And the people have never been sicker, weaker, crazier, more depressed, more suicidal, more out of shape than ever before in history. Fast forward to 2023. This is the US vaccination schedule for under 6 years of age. What is the message we are to take from this? What kind of horrifying, hostile world, devoid of personal power and at the mercy of legions of invisible enemies, did our divine Creator bring us into? The message appears to be, there's nothing any of you can do, either individually or collectively. It has nothing to do with the way you think, the way you eat, the way we relate to one another. Nothing to do with your conception of life, your economic circumstances, none of that. It's all just basically germs. And you are a victim. Now here's Wendy with the good news.